People do make mistakes about treating charging as a parking problem. When and how you draw power from the grid is the real constraint. So where do you park vehicles is secondary.
Today's guest is Dr. Sheldon Williamson, professor at Ontario Tech and a leading thinker on how fleets go electric.
Tackle the problem at the neck of it. You need to start by mapping time, not the vehicles. When are the assets idle? When is the grid stressed? When is the power cheapest? Once fleets see that charging is a scheduling problem, not a hardware problem, the mindset shifts. Tomorrow's fleet managers looks more like an energy manager than a mechanic.
One of the most important things for a fleet manager right now would be become energy literate. I mean, that is a skill. I guess that's why you're the professor of that, right? I mean, how do we make people more energy literate?
First of all,
welcome, Sheldon.
thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation because I think this is, so top of mind for so many people who have fleets. And I'm excited to, talk to, the educated, professorial kind of perspective that you're going to bring to this. So, let's start with, what originally pulled you into this kind of research around electrification and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it all started when I was doing my undergraduate studies, right?
Okay.
Just past college and then undergrad. So I've always been interested in the intersection of power electronics, energy storage, and the real world impact that it has. So transportation electrification, as we know it, or e-mobility, is compelling because that's where I think theory meets the scale. Like vehicles, grids, infrastructure, even people, like
Right.
you and I, like we drive a vehicle every day. So you can either design a perfect battery in a lab, but if it doesn't work for fleets operating every day, it fails. That challenge kind of hooked me.
Yeah, and it seems like electrification has been such a oddly controversial topic, and it
Yeah.
feels like we kind of move forward in fits and starts. And some of it's legitimate in that we encounter real world roadblocks. Like I think there's challenges around infrastructure and things like that we can get into. But I mean, what's your take on how the industry is growing and progressing?
The more recently, I think the industry had a taper off of electric vehicle sales. If you talk about sales of EVs, commercial vehicles were tapered off because of the charging infrastructure, because the grid can't take it. The incentives from the government slowed down.
Right.
So naturally, because nobody's buying the vehicles, so it's kind of tapered down, but it's not gone down. It's tapered off. And I see another rise coming. And this has to do with battery costs, cost of charging infrastructure, the grids, the utilities trying to improve their infrastructure, and so on. So I think the second rise is around the corner. This is definitely, it's obvious to me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, so what do you think? I mean, it's interesting when you develop new technology. One of the things that happens is that, oftentimes is that, you build something really compelling and useful, and then, you strain the external systems around that. And I think that's what we keep seeing here. Like first it was, like we just didn't have the battery tech. And so like, to build, like we're not going to be able to produce enough batteries. And then we kind of figured out how to make batteries that, were, cost effective and, the right capacity. And then it was, like we just don't have enough charging infrastructure. And now we're like hitting yet another wall. It's like we put all that charging infrastructure in and it's like, do we have enough power in the grid to do this? And it's like, It seems like we keep bouncing around, like bouncing off the walls here. What do you see as sort of like the biggest challenges right now to making all this work?
Right now, I think it's the government incentives. If you'd ask me, practically everything's possible. From a research standpoint, from like universities like mine, where we do research day in and day out, We have industry partners, OEMs. They're already ready with solutions. So I would say the government incentives that we're lacking, educating the politicians more about electric vehicles, not just electric vehicles, but also the infrastructure that goes with it. That
Right.
is the key. So the that is the non-technical part. But from the technical standpoint, I still see improvements to be done. That's why the research is there. So stuff that we are doing, for example, making batteries safe, um, charging infrastructure, going fast charging while keeping the battery healthy. There is question marks about that. Like, okay, so if you charge in 5 minutes, what's going to happen to your battery? Well, the life
Right.
actually goes down, and battery degradation is a real thing. Lithium batteries. The other thing is also dependence on lithium. Okay, nobody talks about that, but it's true. Trying to get to batteries that made devoid of lithium so that we are not dependent on the East. So we can build batteries here. So things like that. And then from the grid standpoint, how does the grid handle the load? There's a lot of research going on around that. So there are things that still need the technical research, which is ongoing with companies like the companies that I work with, as well as the educating the politicians at the same time. So there's a new wave of electric vehicle or electrification, fleet electrification that's going to come around.
So you mentioned incentives, which I think is interesting, but like where do you see these incentives? Like, because we talked about a lot of things there, right? I mean, sort of the vehicle manufacturers. I mean, incentives for people to buy vehicles, incentives for the vehicle manufacturers to produce these vehicles. Is it incentive for the building of charging stations? Is it incentives around electrification? I mean, is it like, do you see any big gap there in terms of the incentives and where they could be best applied?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The incentives have to be around buying the vehicle, tax cuts where you can, tax rebates rather, that you can get for buying the vehicle, that
Uh,
has to be in place. Recently, I know of a few provinces here in Canada and states in the US also cutting the incentives for buyers to buy the vehicle itself.
yeah.
Incentives, as you rightly mentioned, for charging infrastructure. Well, I have a theory. If you have enough charging, right? Enough charging at every stop, like a gas station now, today. Today you have gas stations almost every other block.
Right.
If we have chargers every other block, then you wouldn't need a large battery. That'll reduce the cost of the vehicle itself. So those things tie in nicely with each other. If you increase the charging, so incentives have to be given to 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 charging companies, to the gas stations, which would rather convert to charging stations, or so on and so forth. So malls is another one where you could give them incentives to put in enough charging infrastructure. So I think all these will play a role, vital role.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky thing because what you're talking about is sort of increasing demand, right? I mean, because
Yep.
it's traditional economics. Let's work on the demand side of that curve, right? But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's hard to it's a chicken and egg kind of situation. Like you kind of have to work a little bit on both the demand side and the supply side because we need these charging stations and and that has implications down the line. It's sort of like I saw an interesting piece about Chinese manufacturing the other day, and it just talked
Hmm.
about how you have to think about Chinese manufacturing more in terms of what industry, what product you're trying to do to find where to produce it, because when they build their factories, it's not just they're building the factories, they're building the whole ecosystem around those factories, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a really interesting way to look at the problem, right? So they have they build around supply chains, and like, so how do we get to that sort of like where we can build around the supply chain of like these vehicles in like, and put the right pieces in the right place at the right time, but also work on the demand side of that equation, because I agree with you. If you don't have demand, nobody's going to want to do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what's the right balance there?
Well, I think it's also the thinking, the
Yeah.
like, charging, treating charging as the one mistake that most fleets make is that treating charging as a parking problem instead of an energy problem.
Yeah.
So where do you park vehicles is secondary.
Yeah.
When and how you draw power from the grid is the real constraint, and
Yeah.
that's where we need to tackle the problem at the neck of it. So it's not. People do make mistakes about treating charging as a parking problem. So that's
That's an
a first
interesting
thing.
way to look at it too. I mean, because
Yeah,
as an owner of a electric vehicle, I see that problem all the time. It's
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's like it's more about like how long can I leave my car in this space while I go do some shopping,
yeah.
and that's sort of my limiting factor why I'm sitting there waiting for a charger to be open. But yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't heard somebody frame it that way before.
Exactly. So you need to start by mapping time, not the vehicles.
Yeah.
You start by mapping time. When are the assets idle? You have to ask yourself, when is the grid stressed? When is the power cheapest? Um, so once fleets see that charging is a scheduling problem, not a hardware problem, the mindset shifts.
Yeah.
That's my, at least my opinion.
No,
So
and I think that's a really interesting perspective that I haven't really heard many people talking about before.
hmm.
As a fleet leader, you're juggling a lot: driver safety, vehicle uptime, cost control. That's where Element Fleet comes in. With industry leading data, proactive maintenance programs, and risk management solutions, Element helps you keep your fleet moving efficiently and safely. They partner with you to tackle challenges head on so you can focus on delivering results. Ready to take your fleet performance to the next level? Visit elementfleet.com. You also mentioned, sort of the raw materials side of this, earlier you talked about sort of acquisition of lithium and things like that.
Yeah.
And we do know that, that is kind of, the East has the best battery tech. They have access to well, I mean, maybe not, maybe I'm making that assumption, but they seem to have, a big industry around it for sure. And they
Yep.
have a lot of mineral
Yep.
access, and they've been in the process of acquiring mineral rights throughout like Africa and things like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but that at the same time, I do keep hearing reports of, oh, we found this massive lithium deposit in the US, or satellite imaging just discovered this new massive thing of lithium. And then, I hear like, oh, we've got these balls at the bottom of the ocean, and if we could just get them, we can't get those because that's going to destroy the ecosystem. It's like
Yep.
there's all these, it's like I hear of, we have a lot of lithium, we have no lithium, we have a lot of lithium, we have no, so what is the situation?
See, the situation, the way I see it, and I educate my grad students about it and people I meet, engineers alike. So I say, look, the East, specifically China, they have a demand. They made it their business to have a
Right.
demand. We, we as in North America, doesn't typically have a demand for electric vehicles or scooters, two wheelers. It all started from two wheelers in China. They
Right.
had two wheelers, and then they converted those two wheelers to electric scooters. You'll see numerous, every third vehicle or every second vehicle being a two wheeler over there with the population, right?
Yeah.
In North America, it's not the case. Um, Furthermore, the roads in North America are wide and distances are
Right.
far off distances. So we don't believe in electrification yet. There is some, of course, that is again, it depends, right? So really, it starts from the thinking. If there is a demand, and as you rightly said, then we start searching for solutions. So, like for now, the things that have changed are battery costs. Battery costs in China below $60 per unit energy, 60 to $80 per unit energy. Whereas here in North America, to buy it and to actually deploy it, we pay about $100 per unit energy. So that is the difference. If we go to non-lithium based, then we try to be independent of the East. We can build batteries here. Similarly, motors, power electronics, all of these, as per the scale, we can scale up. We can go non-permanent magnet motors. Sorry if I'm being too technical. The permanent
No, no.
magnet motors are power dense motors. They're really compact and small, so they can fit and they give enough power for per kilogram. So permanent magnet motors are built predominantly in China. So to go to non-permanent magnet motors would be the way of the future, to build motors here. So these are things that we need to look at today. And the charger, of course, charging infrastructure needs mature power electronics, which is the case now. So there's nothing stopping us. It's about just building them, and the demand has to be there.
So what do you, I mean, it's interesting to say that we're paying, 20-30% more for batteries here. And then you bring up the idea of like sort of permanent magnets, and that sort of gets into that more the mineral rights and rare earth materials and
Mhm.
that side of things, right? I've heard so much discussion around different technologies here, and like I think what you're talking to is like make the motors more efficient and less expensive to build, and then create new technology around batteries. What do you see as like the most promising technology around batteries?
Right now, sodium ion batteries definitely are around the corner. I can tell you from research that sodium ion batteries, potassium ion batteries, potassium is big. These are minerals that we are rich in. North America is rich in, so we can easily mine them. So, yeah, potassium ion, sodium ion batteries, nothing stopping us from building them. There are some companies popping up, startup companies that are building those batteries. And once the feasibility is proven, then then it's then it's a good sign. So
So
batteries definitely have another 4 or 5 years till we get something, an alternative to lithium batteries.
and so what are sort of the challenges that we're hitting with, because I keep hearing about sodium ion batteries and things like that, and people keep talking, it's like it's just around
Yep.
the corner, it's just around. I've got some, like, and then like people are like, no, those aren't real, it's like, so what's sort of the limiting factors there, and what is it that makes you encouraged about sort
It
of the
is,
developments?
yes, it is really the cost per kilometer for the user, for you and me, right? What do we care about is the cost per kilometer. That is what is the key. So per kilometer driving, lithium batteries are way cheaper now. Okay, technically speaking, the energy density is higher, so it gives you more range. Lithium
With
batteries,
lithium is higher.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. So sodium batteries, potassium batteries, although, but what nobody talks about is the cost of building it right here at home. You know, that will far outweigh the cost per kilometer of driving. So I think it kind of cancels out the range issue.
Mm.
We can build as long as we can build the battery and compete with lithium. Lithium is not going anywhere; it will be there. But in 5 years' time, my take is that sodium and potassium ion batteries will come into the market. It will be a competitor for lithium batteries, and the auto manufacturers will have a choice to make. So go cheaper, less dependent on the yeast, and so on and so forth. So that's my take on it.
Do you ever envision a world where, that we maybe use multiple types of batteries in a vehicle too, to,
Yes,
kind of have that
yes,
lithium benefit and the sodium benefit?
yes. Actually, work with One Energy, a company out in California. They tested two different chemistries of
Hmm.
batteries. One battery for power and one for energy. So they split the batteries. Two batteries in the vehicle is what they're proposing. We worked on the project. It was successful. I mean, I heard, last I heard was they were commercializing the idea. So yeah. So in some time, I think two different chemistries will work like a hybrid sort of
Yeah,
an
like it's just
engine.
hybrid battery. Yeah, I mean,
Hybrid battery. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes sense because I imagine like a sodium ion versus a lithium ion battery might have different charging profiles, for example.
Oh yeah,
And,
definitely.
and if you needed rapid charging for, like day to day things, you could have one chemistry. And if you needed more capacity for longer trips or something that, you could take more time to charge to, you could have that available too. I mean, I would opt
Yes.
for that kind of a vehicle if it
That's
gave me
why
the
I
range.
said one is for power, one is for energy. It would be immediate, like 1 or 2 minute charging, and energy would be longer. Yes.
Yeah, and so how, like comparatively, like how does like potassium or sodium in the charging capacity and time rate against lithium?
It is definitely slower. Lithium can take rapid charge up to about 1C or 2C.
And by one
C rate
C, you
C
mean
is so
Celsius
so
or
let's say, yeah, C rate is the rate at which we charge. So
okay?
1C would be the rated capacity current that the battery can take. So let's say we have 100 amp hour battery. Ampere hour is the
Yeah.
capacity. So if you want to charge that battery in 1 hour, you would put how many amps in it?
If you
100.
wanted 100, yeah.
100 amps. So that would be the 1C rate for that battery.
Okay.
So a 100 ampere hour battery would charge in 1 hour if you passed 100 amps through it. The same battery, if you would want to charge in half an hour, you would put 200 amps, so on and so forth. So the C rate capacity of lithium batteries is far higher than sodium and potassium. And that needs to be worked on by the battery manufacturers, at least make it competitive. And if it competes with lithium, then great. Otherwise, there is power electronics for the energy storage, hybrid energy storage device. You have power electronics which can direct the fast charging to lithium and the slow charging to these alternative batteries in the hybrid battery scenario.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned another aspect of this on the from the demand side of the equation here, that
Mhm,
is a tricky piece, in that in here in North America and in South America too, quite frankly, and,
mhm,
and other
mhm,
places. And I'm sure Africa has the same sort of issue, is
mhm.
long distances, and challenges putting in the infrastructure in place to cover those distances. So, what do you think is sort of the sweet spot for getting North American drivers confident, and losing that sort of range anxiety that we talk about? Like, what do we have to get to make that go?
I think the sweet spot, as in charging distances.
Yeah, just like how much charge do you need? I mean, because I guess it's a
Yeah.
sort of a function of, like how much charge can it hold versus how many charging stations can we bring
Yes,
online,
yes. And it all depends on your storage device. If it's lithium, 500 kilometers, no problem.
Yeah,
But you see, electric vehicles are not your conventional vehicles. Whenever I teach a course, I say, what is the philosophy of having an electrified mobility device? You you are always going to be anxious about charge, right?
right.
Take our cell phone, for example. Cell
I'm
phone,
anxious about that charge all the time.
we want to charge. Even if it's full, near full, we will look for a charger. If the charger is available, we'll plug it in, right?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
we even have wireless charging now. In our vehicle, there are wireless charging pads where we drop our phone. It's charges. So we don't bother about the range. And we are never worried about it. So similarly, I think with lithium batteries on the vehicle, as many as many chargers we get, the better. So we don't wait till the vehicle actually comes to empty, like as in the gas tank. We
Right.
if it's half full, it's okay, we will drive, we know it's okay. But when it's near empty, that's when we go to fill gas. But with the electric vehicle, it's not so. We look for chargers even when it's not. That kind of is ties in with the fact that the charging infrastructure is not enough.
Right.
It's a philosophy, human philosophy. Human thinking is that, oh, shoot, there is no charging station, let's say in 500 kilometers from here. I'm driving on the highway. I need to charge now. So, so whatever charging station comes, we charge. A day will come when, as ideal scenario for me would be like I said, every couple blocks has charging station, like a gas station today. So there would be no problem with range anxiety. So it is chicken and egg problem.
Yeah.
When you say sweet spot today the sweet spot would be anywhere between 300 to 400 kilometers. You want a charging station. Otherwise, we start getting really anxious. So yeah, but ideally, an ideal scenario, like I said, every couple blocks, every 3 blocks within the square radius, kilometer radius, you have a charging station.
Yeah, I feel like because we kind of did this exercise, over Thanksgiving here. And, we were talking about driving to Michigan for the in-laws. And between here and there,
From Chicago, right?
from Chicago, well, Evanston technically, but yeah, Chicago
Yeah, Evanston, yeah, the suburb
like
of
Detroit
yeah.
area of Michigan.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the challenge I found was
6 hours. What is it? 5.5,
about
6 hours.
five-ish hours, 5.5.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
depends on
yeah,
traffic and things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that. But the problem is, like, I couldn't find enough chargers between here and there
yep,
to make
yep,
that trip
yep.
work. And
Like I said, yep,
yeah, and so the thing, I'm thinking for me, like in this area, and like I, have every once in a while I have to go up to, Milwaukee, and there's not no good charging infrastructure between here and there, and I can make it there, but I can barely make it there and back on a single
yep,
charge in my
yep.
ID4. And so
Absolutely.
there's like one Walmart in Milwaukee that has charging stations, and
Hmm.
one time I went up there and they were all being repaired. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, wow, that's not good.
No.
So like, I'm kind of the mind, like for where I live right now, it's like about 1,000 kilometers is what would be really
Yeah.
ideal for me. But nobody's making those.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, like if I had the chargers in between stations, I wouldn't care as much because I just pull over for
Exactly.
10, 15 minutes. And like when you're in that medium band too, where you're charging from maybe like 20% to 60%, that goes really quick. It's
Yep.
like that last
Yep.
10, 20%, that takes a
Yep.
long time. So like
Yep.
if you had intermittent chargers and you could just put like, it's not
Yeah.
a lot of time to charge.
Yes. Every 200 or 300 kilometers, if you have, like if you say 200 miles, right? 200 miles, you have a charging station. That's beautiful. That's perfect. 150 to 200 miles. You have a charging station and you can quickly charge within half an hour, quick as in half an hour to 40 minutes, that intermediate range, that would be good enough for now.
Yeah.
With today's technology. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
But I mean, like, but you rightly mentioned, I mean, would talk about, United States where I am, but I mean, Canada where you're at, I mean, talk about like vast expanses of empty road and
Yep.
like to go from, Toronto to Vancouver or something in an electric vehicle would probably be quite a challenge, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, definitely. Without the charging infrastructure, it is definitely a challenge. You just can't think of it.
Yeah. So what do you I mean, from your studies and from your discussions with all these folks, I mean, what do you think is the best strategy right now for that kind of a problem? Is it increasing the capacity so that we can go further, or is there a way to incentivize those? I mean, because we do have the highways there. I mean, so from a government perspective, we have rest stops, from that are sponsored by the states and the governments and things like that. I mean, is the answer to put charging stations, have like government take that first step, like we did with the highway systems, where they have
Yes,
to build that first, or is it private?
I think it has to start with the government. It
Okay.
has to start with bylaws for buildings and homes, commercial buildings. If it has to restructure their laws for building a new building, let's say a new building infrastructure has to be built by a company. They will have to do that. The laws have to be in place. So the building bylaws, construction laws have to change. Some of them are changing. Commercial buildings, yeah, at least in Canada, I know that they are changing the laws for building new infrastructure around. The utilities bringing in the power to the building, their laws are changing. So that goes hand in hand with the government, of course. Um, those are the metrics that actually matter.
Yeah. Well, I also want to touch on something else that you mentioned earlier too, that I
Mhm,
thought that was very interesting, and especially when we talk about China and the way that they've historically approached things. You talked
mhm,
about the two-wheeler. I mean, we know that, like, China had the whole, like, let's get everybody a bike, kind of
mhm.
approach to things. And like here in North America, we like our big vehicles and our big roads. But that the idea of the personal EV and the two-wheeler is really compelling. And it is a great way to like ease the congestion and get mobility for people. But what do we need
Yeah.
to do to change that thinking?
See, I think bike paths, Chicago. I was in Chicago for 5 years for my grad studies. I know Chicago now has a lot of
Yeah,
bike paths.
for
Suburbs,
sure.
the
Yeah.
where you are, Evanston, there
Yeah.
are bike paths in place.
Yeah.
So why don't we make electric bikes a norm? E-bikes a norm. Let's say a downtown, okay, downtown Lakeshore Drive or whatever, you can drive only e-bikes and nothing
Mm,
else. There should be a norm set that again plays in, it ties in with the government that has to make the call for the state of Illinois
yeah.
or even just city of Chicago. So that is one thing. So getting us to think, getting the public to think. Of course, we're not going to be the same. We have winters here, which
Yeah. I
is
was gonna
now
say, like, an e-bike in the winter is not a great option.
winter's bad. And
Yeah.
I saw the game the other day. Chicago Bears put a pounding on Cleveland in the winter at home. So,
Oh, now we're getting controversial here.
well, hey, I'm a Bears fan, so
Me
I'm
too.
I'm
Me
still a
too.
Bears fan. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so anyway, it was cold, and in cold weather, lithium batteries don't do so well. That's why I think the future is in sodium batteries and potassium batteries. They actually can beat lithium batteries in the cold.
Mm,
They're not as temperature dependent. So those things, those batteries, if we put in bikes, in cars, in fleets of vehicles, that would make more sense. So it all, I think, ties in nicely with alternative batteries, alternative motors, and all that stuff which I talked about earlier, going into practice.
yeah. I wonder though, with the sort of mindset that we have, particularly here in the United States,
Hmm.
like, how do we start getting people to think in those? I mean, is it that we need different kinds of like
Hmm.
PEVs, or is it that we just need to reorient thinking?
Interesting question. I would say you need to prioritize using two-wheelers. If you can, if you
Mhm.
can, right? Not if you're going far, like you said, from Michigan, from Illinois to Michigan, 6 hour, 5 hour drive. You cannot take a
Yeah, that's a lot
two-wheeler.
for,
But something in
yeah.
downtown, say you're going to work. If you're going to work and the weather permitting, use your bike. There should be laws in place, and that's when the thinking will change. That listen, today is a two-wheeler day, or at least on a particular day you use only two-wheelers, something like that. I know it's a little far off thinking. The roads don't allow it, but bike lanes are there. They're there for a reason. It's to
Yeah.
ride your bike. So, and kilometers and thousands of kilometers of bike path. So I think we need to use it smartly.
Well, I mean, we do have the road, like you say. I mean, the bike paths are available, but maybe the balance is wrong in terms of how we have built roads and the amount of space we give to, personal,
Hmm.
electric vehicles or just bikes in general.
Yep.
Have you seen any cities that have made that conversion?
Yes.
Because we have a lot of examples of going from nothing to two-wheelers to four, but like from four to
Yeah.
two,
Yep.
do we have
Yeah.
any good examples of that?
I have seen, at least in North America, I have seen city of Montreal
Hmm.
in Quebec in Canada
Right.
take a lead in that. Energy literacy is important. you know how do you interpret energy? Do you understand what it is that makes you ride a bike in the first place? So that comes from literacy of energy. That is important. Systems thinking. Tomorrow looks like an energy. Tomorrow's thinking, tomorrow's fleet manager, so to speak, looks more like an energy manager than a mechanic, so to speak.
That's a
So that
really interesting perspective. I love that. I mean, I love the idea energy literacy. We talk about, critical thinking and all that sort of thing, but energy
absolutely.
literacy is I mean, that is a skill. I mean, I guess that's why you're the professor of that, right? I mean, but like that systems thinking, energy literacy perspective. I think that's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
How do we make people more energy literate?
Well, first of all, it comes from confidence, right? Are you confident enough to become energy literate? You shouldn't be scared of anything new. Understanding energy is the way of the future. We talk about e-mobility, electrification, and going electric. Everything, like even airplanes, for that matter.
Yeah,
We're talking about future airplanes going to be all electric. Okay, you're sitting in an airplane, but you don't know what it's all about. Today we sit in an airplane, we know what, at least the fundamentals. So that is where it starts. Energy literacy starts from, we go to high schools, for example. We go to intermediate schools. We go to smaller kids. We to older kids. We have open houses. University professors actually go, graduate students go. We show off experimental systems, battery system or a charging system, and believe it or not, kids today, they know more than kids of yesterday.
yeah,
That is true. So
yeah.
we are training, in a way, the new generation. So that
It's
is, I
people like me
think,
that are the problem, I think.
like you and me.
My
Yes.
generation, yeah.
You and me, we are the problem. So, but like, for example, I'll give you an example. I have a 10-year-old, okay, and an 8-year-old at home. The two boys, they say, Dad, you're really outdated, you know? And I said, why? They said, well, you're driving an electric vehicle. It's so outdated. I said, what? We are not even, we're dating electric vehicles now? What is your idea of mobility? Well, we'll be flying in cars. Our cars won't be riding on the road at all. They'll be flying cars. I said, wow, that may be actually in 8, 10 years' time, it may be a reality. So the kids today are educated more than we think they are. So, so I think we're doing something right. The education system, or the literacy of energy is going the right way.
Yeah.
Although the politicians have to be educated. At least in Canada here, we have a program where they select a few of the professors and invite them to the parliament, so to speak. So I was once selected. I went, I spoke to the prime minister, I spoke to the minister of transportation, and things like that. So they were, very fairly educated by me a whole day. It was exhausting, but worth the while.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a tall ask for, government, but it is interesting because I think that, you mentioned planes, and so we sort of know, like, but I almost wonder if we do know that, like, because we know that like planes use jet fuel, but like even myself, like somebody who's like spends a lot of time like mulling these things over,
Hmm.
you know, it wasn't until we started like quantifying that carbon footprint of flights, and you look at how much damage a flight does. I mean,
Yeah.
it was eye-opening to me, like when you started making those kinds of equivalencies of like what the impact of a single flight is.
Yeah.
There's things that like it's really quite stunning how much of an impact it has.
It is it and it all starts from taxi, believe it or not. We did
Yeah.
a small project. I did a small project with a company that makes motors. They said, well, we want to electrify the taxi, only the taxiing moment of the flight, not the flight itself, just the taxi. So that needed, it's like an electric vehicle on land, but a heavy one at that. So um, taxiing takes a lot of fuel because the engine operates at a slower speed, and it's when it's at lower speed, lower power output, it is very inefficient. About 5%, 10% efficient. 90% of the fuel is burnt. So we electrified. It takes about good half an hour of taxiing till the flight actually takes off, depending on the airport. Of course, Chicago O'Hare is famous for that.
Oh yeah, we got a
So,
lot of
yeah.
taxi. We got a lot of flying around the loops and around the lake before you land
Oh,
too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So all of that stuff takes up a lot of fuel, believe it or not. So
Yeah.
I was happy that I did a project of that nature. Something, although it's a drop in the ocean, it is something. And well, when it's in the flight, in flight, actually, it's not so inefficient because it's full throttle. It's it's like driving in the highway.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you're fast, you're full throttle, the engine is operating at its optimum efficiency. It's good. The taxiing is the one that takes a lot of fuel. So, we do our small part every day and hope for the best.
Well, and I got to mention this a lot, like just congestion in cities. Like we don't use these things efficiently.
Yep.
If your organization depends on a fleet of vehicles, it's time to think about your fleet as a strategic asset. Element delivers end-to-end solutions that reduce costs, improve productivity, and support sustainability goals. From vehicle acquisition to electrification and everything in between, Element's data-driven approach helps organizations optimize performance and keep their drivers safe and supported on the road. To learn more about how Element can move your fleet forward, visit elementfleet.com. I keep hearing these debates about electrification,
Mhm.
and it's like, well, electric vehicles have a huge environmental impact too, which is not untrue. I mean, there's definitely like an environmental cost to doing this,
Yes.
but like I hear such wildly different numbers from different groups of people, and like where what is where do those lines like really, like intersect? Like how much more, environmentally friendly is it to electrify versus sort of remaining on fossil fuels?
This is important question.
Yeah,
This is very important. Again, I may or may not be wrong. I'm answering this from my point of view.
sure.
So whenever new technology comes around, we talk about well to wheels efficiency. Well, as in where we get the fuel from,
Yeah,
and the wheels are the wheels of the vehicle. So
yeah,
what's the energy efficiency? We can say we call it fuel cycle efficiency, complete fuel cycle. So getting electricity today is efficient. We know that getting electricity from a raw material is efficient. It depends on the type of generating station. We generate electricity at a generating plant, at a
yeah.
power plant. So if that power plant is, let's say, here up in Canada, it's mostly hydro. So water. Water is quote unquote renewable and it's green. So well, fairly green. So getting electricity from hydro is is a good way to put it. It's efficient, it's clean. At times when you're developing thermal plants, thermal plants are inefficient. 30-40% efficiency and emissions that go into the atmosphere. So that becomes troublesome when you have so much thermal generation going on.
And by thermal
Um,
generation, you mean like fossil fuels, coal,
Fossil
things
fuels,
like that?
wood, yeah, yeah, yeah. Basically, you're burning wood and you're generating. So coal plants, fossil fuel plants.
Yeah.
So that has to be replaced. No other way of putting it. Build more hydro plants, renewable energy, solar, wind, the free energy that's out there. Try to make solar charging stations. Here up in Canada, I worked with two companies, separate occasions, to build solar chargers. So, but here the problem was the snow gathering on top of the solar panels. Hey, that's a problem. Well, we
Overcast
made
days.
an
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and then you go and shovel the snow off the. You can't do that in a farm, solar farm in a remote location, like you said, here in Canada. It's not humanly possible. So we built a active way of actually charging the power electronics charges and also melts the snow, so you
Mhm.
don't have to go and shovel it or maintain it every day. It melts itself. So that was something, and it's commercial now. It's commercially available. The company went and commercialized it. And that was something that we did. So things like that. So it has to be green. Green energy has to take place in order to get the electricity. And then, of course, the electric vehicle is efficient. It's about 90% efficient, 10% losses in maybe the power electronics and the motor and small things like that. But it is pretty efficient compared to a conventional vehicle.
So, do you think that if we electrify our fleets, can we produce enough of that electricity through renewables?
Not completely. Renewables are weak sources of energy. By weak, I mean they don't produce the voltage to which they can, charge all the vehicles themselves. But it can definitely integrate with the grid. Definitely. So, and be less dependent on the grid. We can say 70% comes from the grid, 30% comes from renewables, something like that, in between. Up until such time that, again, the dollar per kilowatt, the dollar per unit energy becomes feasible for using renewables. It should not outweigh the cost. So companies obviously, it's funny because in research we could do decent research and we publish and we say, hey, this is good and it works. But the industry always asks, what is the cost? What is the cost of doing it? So
Right.
that's the challenge. Making it cost effective is the challenge.
And Do you think is that something that because you say that these renewable sources are the ones that are going to help us supplement and obviously by market these things are very different, right? I mean, because in Arizona, a solar farm is very
Yeah.
different than a solar farm in Chicago, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Do you think that so that necessitates a mixture of sources of energy sources, right? Do you envision that we would there's some transition point where there's going to be a lot of different options available to us that we can kind of split that and I think it's it much like that sort of range question. It's not like it's a dynamic kind of problem. I mean, I think this is a dynamic problem of like increasing efficiency, bringing new sources online. Like what is it, I'm like asking you like what's that magic button that we can push that's going to fix all these problems, but what is that magic button that we can push to fix all these problems?
See, again, like, again, it comes down to the thinking, the way we think of energy. Um, in Europe, the Scandinavian countries, take them for example, the
Yeah, which is a great
Denmarks,
example
this
because there's a lot of cold and snowy
co-
conditions there
cold, snowy
and lack of light.
conditions, and they have almost 80 or 90% of their fleet is electrified of their vehicles. They have high impetus on renewable energy. Almost three
Which is
quarters of
interesting
their
because they have so much access to fossil fuels there too.
yes. So it comes down to the thinking, the government, the education, educating the common man like you and me about energy, educating the next generation about the interdependence of on fossil fuels. It's as simple as that. So yeah, I think the example that I gave, my kids already educated, similar. My kids are average kids, so they would their school, whatever they're doing is the right thing. I go to schools, I teach kids as an outreach program. It is wonderful to teach the young minds.
Yeah. Well, I want to highlight something you said earlier too.
Mhm.
You said, fleet managers have to be more focused on managing the energy than sort of managing the mechanics side of it,
Mhm. Mhm.
the repairs and that sort of thing. I mean, from a for a fleet, somebody who's getting into fleet management, and looking to the future, what do you envision, like from that perspective of like being the person who's managing the energy, looking at it from the energy perspective of this? What do you see like the future of that role looking like?
So fleets, if you look at fleets of electric vehicles,
Yeah.
if we look at them as mobile storage, energy storage,
Yeah.
that would be the way to go. Think of them as mobile energy storage at a scale with smart charging and eventually vehicle to grid. I hardly even talked about vehicle to grid power
Right.
flow. They can provide demand response. They can provide facilities such as peak shaving or resilience to the grid. That turns fleets from grid liabilities into grid assets,
Mm.
so to speak. And that would be a way to think about them, a fleet of electric vehicles.
So if you, I mean, like, say you were a fleet manager today and you had a fleet of vehicles and you're electrifying your fleet, and how would you go back to the business and explain that concept that like, we're not just a cost center here necessarily. We can be a net asset to making our buildings more efficient or our other aspects of our business more
Hmm.
efficient by feeding back into it and creating a new way to utilize energy for our overall business. How would you tell them to
Yeah,
approach
I
that?
think that would come down to, yeah, that's a good question. I think that comes down to regulation speed, and that technology is definitely ahead of policy always. If interconnection rules and market structures catch up, the adoption accelerates fast. If not, progress slows, right? Artificially. And that is the biggest wild card that I think we have.
Yeah.
Another thing in the future, the electrified fleet would be like vehicles, chargers, the grid. They are all coordinated through software. And we all know that software industry is always at a boom.
All right.
So charging, the fact that we charge vehicles, it's invisible to drivers. We don't know. Okay. Energy decisions are automated. Fleets buy mobility and energy services. So that would be an interesting future.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting space to be working in because fleets can do things because they have scale that
Mhm.
individuals can't do. And I think there's an opportunity here to drive some of these changes with fleets that at the individual level we can't necessarily do.
Yes.
If you had to say like here's the one thing that I would love for you fleet managers to push for, what would that be?
That electrification, it starts with buying the vehicles and it
Okay.
starts with understanding energy.
Yeah.
That is a big belief, and it is important that we drop it right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, coming right back to that energy literacy, like it sounds like that one of the most important things for a fleet manager right now would be become more increasingly energy literate.
Mhm.
On that front, I mean, since you're one of those people who are making people literate in energy, what, how could people, follow like the work that you're doing and other folks like you are putting out there?
Well, for me personally, of course, through my work at Ontario Tech University here in Toronto, my research publications, you can follow my research publications if you want. I'm always available on social media, LinkedIn, um, and collaborations with industry partners, which are mostly focused on real world fleet deployment, real world electrification, real world e mobility. Those are some ways that some of our listeners can follow me. There are others around the world. Similarly, you can see research publications and follow the collaborations with the industry partners. So that's one way that listeners can keep up with us.
Well, I think that's a great idea of like, hey, the private public partnership kind of aspect of this, like reaching out, folks reaching out to you specifically to partner with you to really dig into some of these issues at the fleet level. I think, you love real world opportunities and I think that, fleet managers would do well to, partner with, schools to try to do innovative things and really push the boundaries of what's available.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. I mean, you gave me a lot of great new buzzwords too, like energy literacy. I'm going to be talking about that for the next 2 weeks nonstop. So like, thank you for that one. But, thanks so much for being on. Thanks for sharing your learning, your understanding and knowledge. And I think it's a great perspective that you bring to this conversation. So thanks so
Thanks.
much for
Thanks for
being on.
having me on, Chris. It was great talking to you. We can go on and on for hours. I know there's a limit on time, but
Yes.
definitely it was fun conversation. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. For sure. And everybody get energy literate.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks so much.